you can have everything you want, just not everything today. So you can have your cake and eat it too. That's how I live my life. And, to the women listening to this, it also applies to like your partner, your relationship with your partner. I think the best relationships are ones that make you more of who you are, right? It's like 1 + 1 = 3. Like a lot of people are surprised that like David works for me, but he's open to like owning that. And you need a guy that really just loves you for everything that you are, especially if you are a CEO personality. Like you don't have to dim yourself. So when I say like you can have your cake and eat it too, I'm not just applying to like business and being able to design your life of freedom, right? Like don't think that you have to change yourself and make yourself smaller for a person because you feel like, society doesn't accept that.
Welcome to the She's So Sweet podcast, where we interview accomplished women who have worked their way to the C-suite. I'm your host, Kristi Faltorusso, Chief Customer Officer and award-winning customer success executive. I am so excited for today's guest. We've got Melissa Kwan, who's the co-founder and CEO at eWebinar. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so thrilled. I'm so glad that Leah introduced us, and I'll have to give Leah a shout out later. But I was going through your website. I was super impressed with the product that you built. So I'm going to want to learn a little bit and hear a little bit more about what you're doing there. So before we get to all the good stuff, let's start there. I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about you, anything that you can share about eWebinar, kind of what your day-to-day looks like as the CEO and as a co-founder.
That's a huge question.
Break it up as you see fit.
So I've spent 14 years bootstrapping 3 startups. My first 2 companies lasted 10 years in the real estate tech space. The last job I had and quit was at SAP. Always been in sales, business development. eWebinar, I started 2 months after I sold my last company, about almost 5 years ago now. And eWebinar is an automated webinar platform that turns videos into webinars, so you don't have to do them over and over again. So we focus on helping CS teams, customer success teams, do trainings, onboardings over and over without like being there live and adding anyone else on their team. So this was actually a problem that I personally live with in my last startup. Because we were bootstrapped, I was everything except for code. So like sales, marketing, accountant, trainer, like you name it. And I was also nomading at the time. I nomaded for 3 years. And I would just be doing these repetitive onboardings and trainings for my customers that I had just closed, because if they don't use the product, then I don't get the payment next month.
Right.
And I was also doing these on opposite time zones of the world. So I kept thinking, like, why
you're checking like all the horrible boxes?
Yeah, like why isn't there this perfect product that could just relieve me of this thing, so I could just go and live my life? Like I remember like being in Japan, like the first thing I would do is go to the hotel lobby to see how fast the internet is, and could that do like a GoToWebinar or a Zoom, because I have to come down at 4 a.m. to do it in the lobby. And sometimes there'd be like 1 or 2 people there. So like I know this problem super well. So after my last company was sold, I was like, okay, what do I do next? Because I didn't sell for retirement level money. I did make life-changing money at the time.
Okay.
And I didn't want to work forever. So and this was the idea that just kept me up at night. So so it's been 5 years. And interesting fact is my life partner, David, is also my co-founder to the startup.
We're going to unpack that, because I have parents who worked together for 46 years, literally 7 days a week. They owned a deli. And so I'm always very interested in couples that work together. I also worked for The Knot, which is a wedding lifestyle media company. And the 2 founders of The Knot were also a married couple. And so I worked under a married couple. So I'm actually let's spend a minute here here. How is the dynamic between you and David? How is that every day?
So he didn't start as my co-founder. He came in a year later.
Okay.
I was so tired of not knowing how to manage engineers in my previous 10 years that I thought I could start this company without having a technical co-founder and just hired a dev shop to do all the product. Massive mistake. So please do not do that. And then David was a fractional CTO for other startups. And then he started helping me to try to figure out why the software wasn't working. And then it turns out he's actually a really good coder. We just never talked about work until then.
That's
and at that point, I've been with him for 7 years. So it wasn't like I just met this guy. So we just never touched on the subject. Okay. And so when he was starting to help, the software started working and we're just building right at that time. And so I was like, well, why am I paying these guys hundreds of thousands of dollars? Why don't I just stop paying them, make you my CTO and co-founder? So that was how it started. At first, I think the first year was the most challenging. Okay. Because you have to figure out a new way of communicating, right? Like you have to have this sort of emotional and like verbal maturity, I guess, in order to work with family, let alone someone who sleeps beside you, every day, right? Like I think when you talk to your family or your friends versus like, your boss that you're not related to, you lose that kind of courtesy. So you just kind of blurt things out. And that could be taken very personally. And then after work, you're trying to shift into your personal life, but then you already feel kind of jilted in your professional life. So that took a while to figure out. But once we figure that out, everything's amazing. Like because we have a fully remote team, like that was like one of my non-negotiables. We nomad 11 months of the year where everybody's on different time zones. So we have the exact same lifestyle and like professional schedule. So we go to everything that our friends invite us to. We go to Burning Man festivals, cool. Like whatever we go to. And we basically, work at our own hours whenever we want. And we started this company during the pandemic, not purposely, but it kind of went into that. And our friends were like, you guys work together and can't leave the house. Like you're just always together. Like how? Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. And actually like what's really weird is like we do spend a lot of time together, but like our preferred state is still to be together because we're actually really good friends. Like we're best friends and we have a lot of fun. So I think if you can find that dynamic, that's amazing because like, of course we're also bootstrapped. So, I would love to not split half my company with someone that's not related to me. I think that's pretty smart. Yeah. So at some point we can enjoy the fruits of both our labors and not just both.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that actually kind of came full circle. I don't know if I could work with my husband. I love him. He is actually probably my number one listener to this podcast, so he's going to listen to this. I love him dearly. We have agreed that would never be an option for us. We are so much better as friends and partners than we would be as colleagues.
But I love to hear that worked. Is also important.
Yeah. Listen, we're good at different things, but I also think we've got very different styles when it comes to our professional lives. And I don't want to work with him. And I definitely wouldn't work for him. That's for sure. Okay. All right. Well, listen, so I'm going to go on a limb. I'm going to make an assumption here that you didn't dream of being the CEO and co-founder of eWebinar when you were a little girl. So I want you to think back quickly and kind of, what did you think you were going to do? Like when you were young, before you started your career, before you figured out all the things you like and do not like, what did you think you were going to be doing?
Well, I need to give the audience some context. So I grew up in Hong Kong until I was 10, but I'm from a very traditional Chinese family. So what that means is there was no other path for me outside of marrying rich and young. So that was like
I think that's a goal for some women that are still out there who would like to get married rich and young.
They're probably Asian. So like every Asian mother is like telling their daughters, you need to get married rich and young. So I was just kind of told this narrative, or, you become a professional. So like something that, your parents would be proud of telling their friends. So whether it's an investment banker, a doctor, an accountant, like something super stable that has a good, good salary and something that's like easily understood because my parents were not entrepreneurs. So what happened? I think I was always entrepreneurial, but I was never an entrepreneur.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Like, being in school, I remember making these like origami cranes and selling them for 25 cents to my friends in Canada because they never seen origami before. And so like that was like a little venture that I had, like a little thing, like dabble with things on the side. I was always creative. I always liked creating things, but I just never had concept of like work or building companies because my mom was a housewife and my dad worked in the exact same company for 40 years. Like he was the most stable guy that you can imagine. So when I was young, like that's what I thought I was going to be, like either a mother, and I do not have kids, don't want them. So I'm the complete opposite of who I thought I was going to be.
That's so interesting though. But it is, I always like think back to what did we think we were going to do versus what do we end up doing, because it's so funny to see that journey. And for so many of our guests, they kind of paint this picture of like how they got from A to Z, and it's never linear. It never makes sense. And it always took some like big life-changing decision or realization for them to get to where they are. So that kind of leads me to my next question for you. So obviously you've had this fantastic career so far, right? You talked about all these different startups that you've got to bootstrap and sell some of them, and obviously decisions that you made even working at SAP. What were some of those pivotal moments in your career that you feel like contributed to where you are today?
I mean, there's so many.
Give me the good ones. Like I want like the juicy ones.
Oh, let me think. The pivotal moment, I think, definitely, like, I think my last job at SAP for sure, because it was like the nail on the coffin for not ever wanting to work for someone else. So like before SAP, I always worked with small, medium-sized companies where I was still allowed to be my own person. So we're talking like 10 to 20 person companies that I would work for. So, you know, I could like take a project and be the person to refresh the website, for example.
Yep.
So then I would still make all those decisions. And so I didn't know that, right? When you're young, like you have no concept and no comparison to why you do what you do. You just do them. And I remember one day I was like, well, and I was always very ambitious. So I'm like, well, if I want to like have a big company one day, then I want to work for a big company. And SAP was, I was living in Vancouver at the time, and SAP was across the street. So I was like, I got to get into that company because I also really hate mornings. So I was like, well, I can just walk across the street and go to work. Ironically, when I worked with SAP, I was actually in the West Coast working East Coast hours. So I did have to get up at 6 a.m. So that was very counterintuitive. But within the first few months, I was like, I absolutely hate working for big companies because they don't reward you based on your actual output. Like you have to manage your managers and get good lists and do things that they like. And then and then you can have a good time. Like none of that really made sense to me. And I was like the least creative. And then I just started really hating my life there and not wanting to go to work. And I remember like just thinking to myself, like, what am I doing here? Like if I wake up one day and if I die today, but I would die hating my job. Like, why would I want to do that? And I was 27. Yeah. So actually I just quit. I just quit that, like basically that week. And I knew I always wanted to start something. I just didn't know what it was going to be. So I felt like, at the time I had like $100,000 saved, which at 27, it's like pretty significant.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I thought that was going to last me 2 years. It didn't. It lasted me like 9 months. That's another story. But I just started dabbling with different ideas here and there. And eventually, like that became my first company. My first company became my second company. But I would say like, because right after I quit SAP, I had the first taste of like truly living on my own timeline, right? Like getting up at my own time, working my own hours. Like I'm a night owl. I absolutely hate mornings. I hated school all those years because I just hate mornings. So just the thought of needing to go back to an alarm clock was actually enough to keep me going, even when things were really hard. And that's the first thing I would think about is like, okay, like I really want to quit, but then I would walk myself through this. Okay, well, what's the next thing I would do? Okay, I will work for someone else. Okay, what would that job look like? And then I'd be like, okay, what else can I try? So I think that was probably like the most pivotal moment. Because I just hated that job so much.
I mean, you walk away from SAP, you didn't have anything else lined up. You still were thinking through, well, what do I build? How long did it take you from the day or the week that you left SAP to when you started your company?
I mean, I registered it like before I quit. I'm a person who just like my time to execution is like hours, not days, not weeks.
I
like
love
if I
that.
want to do something, like I'm just going to do something. I'm the person with like 200 domains because I wanted to start all these businesses at some point. Like what's the point of waiting? Like I really like kind of ride on that fire momentum. But it took, I want to say like a solid 2 years before like I came up with that product for my first company that like somebody bought. It's just, I was just trying different things. And of course, like running out of money, taking side jobs, like getting, loans from my parents and, building on credit card debt. Like, so I did all that stuff in my 20s and also kind of into my mid 30s. But yeah, like, I mean, I had to learn. I was so green. Like when I say I had no concept of what it means to start a company, is I was so green that I didn't know that when a designer tells you that they're giving you something on Friday, that it could be like any Friday this year or next year. Like every single thing had to be learned.
Yeah.
Because it was also like, because I think a lot of high performers live this also, is like you are your own normal. So when you've never worked with someone that you've hired before, you're like, why isn't everybody sticking to their word? How come nobody has integrity?
Right.
So, and then I also thought that code was like one language. Like I thought like if I give someone an idea to build out, that anybody could do the same thing. I didn't realize that code was not a puzzle. I thought I thought it was a puzzle, but it's actually a Rubik's Cube. There's like many, many different ways to get to that path. So I had to learn that there's like different types of code and different personalities of developers and different like quality of software. So all of that I started learning during those years, which is why it took so long.
Man, okay, so if you had to do it, like if you walked away from your job today and you started another company, what do you think the timeline would be? You don't think it would take you 2 years because of all these learnings, right? Like how fast do you think you could get something going?
I did that for eWebinar, right? So I walked away from Spacio, my last startup. I had 10 years of experience and I was able to finally really channel like the experience that I felt like was valuable, because when my first company became my second, I was still like just winging it. Because my first company, I started as a product company, but because we were bootstrapped and said yes to everyone, we very quickly became an agency, like building custom apps for different people. And it wasn't what I wanted. It paid the bills. And I was so tired of like chasing the invoice and chasing the client and then chasing the invoice that like we shut that down. And then that became my second company. So I found a product within the real estate tech space that we productized. But I was still like, because it was my first SaaS product, then I had the same learning curve, the same like getting into debt, trying things, all that stuff. So after I sold Spacio was when I really felt like, okay, now I've learned enough that I could distill and be able to shorten that timeline. But it still took 1.5 years for us to build eWebinar as a product, like to launch the product. However, we started making money from day one because I had those 10 years of experience. So I think you can only move as fast as time allows, especially in tech, because you have to build the product. There's only so many hours and so many people that you can hire. And especially when you're building from zero, there's a lot of experiments that you have to run, right? You build something for a month, turns out it's not the best, it's not the best platform. So you have to like change to another provider. And that is the time it takes, right? So I think I was working a lot smarter because of the previous experience. And I was able to do it with, in theory, a lot less money. Like there's some mistakes that you still make.
Right.
But there's some that you know how to try your best to avoid, like who not to hire, for example.
I mean, that's huge. If you can just hire the right people and get that right the first time, or at least faster, that makes a huge difference, right? Especially because people end up being your most expensive entity in a business. So let's reflect back here for a second, because my question that I have for you is, obviously when you're a CEO, you're co-founder, any company, very, very early on, you're doing everything. Yeah. I'm curious, what was your least favorite thing that you had to do?
Support. Customer support. Like it's the worst, because in this faceless world of software, you have support tickets with people that are just really angry. And sometimes they're not even angry at you. They're just angry at something else in their life. And you're just the easy target and the person they're talking to. And also, like, don't forget, for 10 years, I was selling software to real estate agents. They were my users. So this is a group that traditionally are laggards of technology because they're much older. They don't like technology. They're being forced to adopt it by their companies. So there was just so many of these kind of basic questions and not feeling like you're appreciated. So there was just years and years of that. And I never got to the point in my last company where I could get off of it, because we just never made enough money. Okay. Like, we never had dedicated support. We all kind of took turns doing it. So, and also because my last company was an open house check-in software. So we were always busiest on the weekend. And of course, you can't ask anyone else to work on the weekend, but the founders. So that was absolutely the worst. But the second worst, which that is my non-negotiable now, is in-person conferences. I don't do any of them.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So this is interesting. I honestly, if I could have made a bet, I would have been like, like the financials, like invoicing, billing, like that stuff. Cause that would be my worst nightmare. Is that somebody said you're responsible.
For us, though.
Okay. Yeah, all right. So all fairness,
we made sure there was like there was definitely like everything's on credit card. We forced them unless you were paying like $100,000 more than but we didn't have a lot of those customers.
Okay. All right. That's fair, because that would literally be my worst nightmare. You have to give me context though on the events. Why? The She's So Sweet podcast is brought to you by ClientSuccess. ClientSuccess is an all-in-one customer success platform to help post-sale implementation and success teams manage customers from new to renew. Through an industry-leading platform approach, ClientSuccess gives businesses an in-depth view into customer health, product usage trends, along with churn and risk data, so that your team can not only retain customers, but help them grow as well. Whether it's managing customer onboarding workflows in shared portals, building custom health scores, tracking sentiment with NPS surveys, or doing more with less through AI and automations, ClientSuccess gives customer success professionals a true one-stop platform to manage all aspects of the customer journey. To learn more about the industry's fastest to implement customer success platform, visit www.clientsuccess.com. That's ClientSuccess. Simple, powerful customer success. You have to give me context though on the events. Why?
Yeah. So in real estate, like, say you want to work with Berkshire Hathaway, right? Okay. Or like Remax. You want to be one of their vendors. It's not like they're giving you all their franchises. They're just giving you have to pay, say, like $10,000 a year. You're on their roster, in their app store. You got a list of their brokers that you can sell to. Oh, by the way, you have to come to 2 of our conferences twice a year, and then you have to have a booth.
They're mandating these things.
Because our booth has to be stocked with our vendors. Oh, by the way, you have to pay for your booth. So everyone else had a much larger company than me. So I remember being in these conference halls, and I would go with one iPad without even a tablecloth. And everybody had these decked out booths, right? And in Vegas, and I had this one iPad, and people were feeling sorry for me. So they would like bring over like their treat basket or like an extra tablecloth. So over the years, like, it got dressed up a little bit, but I was known as that hustler that would do these things. And honestly, like, I really, really prioritize my lifestyle over anything in the world. And so we were nomading 11 months of the year. But first quarter of the year is when those conferences happen. So every other week, I'm going somewhere else. And so it was really affecting the way that David and I were living our lives. Oh, like, I remember even after that company was sold, we went to the Maldives. That was like my treat yourself trip. Mm-hmm. So we did that for like 8 days. And he went to Bali right after to hang out. And I had to fly straight into Vegas to sit at a booth. Like straight from the Maldives. So that was just my life. So now I'm like, no in-person conferences, like nothing that has to be sold face-to-face. Like, I am not talking to a single person unless I absolutely have to. And I haven't had that case yet. I mean, as it relates to like sales and support and things.
Sure. Well, listen, I honestly think in this day and age, the in-person events, I like it because I like the networking, I like the relationship building, but I think that you can drive a pipeline and get leads in so many more creative ways these days than doing these events. I actually don't know that they are as valuable as they once were for businesses. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's a dozen marketers that'll listen to this that'll tell me that I'm wrong and I have no idea what I'm talking about, and that's fine. Okay, let's reflect back on your successes, because you've also had a ton of those. Obviously, we've already hit on a few of them, but it's always my favorite time to just like spend a minute and like think back and reflect and think about what your proudest moments are, right? Or your biggest accomplishment in your career. Because sometimes we think it's going to be the obvious thing, and then you're going to tell me it's absolutely not what you're thinking, Kristi, and here's actually my proudest moment. So think back, proudest moment, largest accomplishment. What do you feel like has been your biggest success to date?
You know what? Thank you for asking that. Nobody has ever asked me that before. And I would have to say it's right now. And I'm saying that I think a lot of people, when you hear that question, you might think like immediately a financial success or some sort of professional success. And I think that's true because that's how people measure. They know it's like they know how to measure, right?
It's like quantifiable,
it's a measurement.
Right?
Like, it's like that's a measurement of success. But when I say like I prioritize lifestyle over anything, like I made a decision like maybe like 5-7 years ago, like when we started nomading, to intentionally design my life around happiness and just enjoyment, because I grew up in a culture where work is everything. And then I came into startups thinking it's everything because I was also not doing very well, right? Like it turned out to be an okay company, but every sale was so hard that, I'm glad that we came out like the other end and we were acquired, but that's why I said it was not at a retirement level sale. But I knew that I wanted to build companies to fund a certain lifestyle, and life design is not black or white, right? There's a gradient in the middle. It's not like today I do and tomorrow I'm going to accomplish it, right? So I think it was like a slow progression for me. And I think now, like maybe this year, is the first time that I, and also we, David and I, have actually accomplished exactly what I had dreamt about, which is, for me, complete freedom, right? So what does that mean, right? Complete freedom is being able to wake up whenever I want, sleep whenever I want, be able to work at my own hours, completely remote team, no calls, even within the team, by the way. No meetings, no calls.
Wait, what?
So if we wanted to catch up with someone for a specific thing, then we do that. But there aren't any stand-ups. There aren't, there's no meetings. But also be able to go to all of our friends' events, weddings, birthdays, you name it. Because now our friends are starting to turn 40, 15, and they have these like marquee multi-day festivals that they host. Burning Man, Africa, we go to all of them. Like we are the people that people always invite because we show up for all of them. But that isn't because we have a flexible schedule. It isn't just because we have a flexible schedule. It's because we can financially afford that. Finally, after all these years. And we are not that extravagant. Like we like luxury. We're not that extravagant. But it was just a goal that I could never hit because I never had a good enough business to be able to pay myself like a normal salary. So this year is a year that I finally feel like I've achieved that. And I am truly living the life that I dreamt of 15 years ago.
That might actually be the best answer I've ever heard to that question, because it's so much bigger than, like, to your point, like this, like quantifiable, like, great, I hit this milestone, I got this title, I got this thing. Like, that's huge, because that is, you've described, is life changing or life defining in your case.
Yeah.
How did you and David get to this point where you realized that you both had that shared goal? Is that something you guys always knew that was an aspiration you both had, is to get to this like level of freedom in your life, like professional freedom?
I mean, I got to say that David is not a goal-oriented person. I am the goal-oriented partner of our partnership. I think that's it, right? Like I've always, the thing is, we have a lot of fun together. And he's the person that taught me that in order for a relationship to really thrive, you have to have fun the same way. You like to travel the same way. You like to, you get along with both of your friends. You like to, you like to go to the same parties. Like to enjoy the same way. Like I was so relieved when I met him in New York. That's where we met. That he wasn't one of those guys that made me like do stuff on the weekend, like pottery class or hiking or whatever. Like I work so much that on the weekends, I just want to binge on TV and like order Uber Eats in bed.
Yeah, you want to rot. You want to lay on the couch. You want to be left alone.
But I've never met a guy that just wants to do that. Or like, you know, because they're always trying to impress you with some activity. I'm like, you can impress me by chilling, right? Or like, you know, or like just like to go to restaurants and eat and drink and not be watching your calories or whatever, you know, like we've always shared fun. Okay. And a large part of how we have fun today, we discovered together. So we discovered like Amsterdam, we discovered house music, we discovered festivals. So, you know, and of course, like I've always worked remote, and he had a startup in New York with 2 other guys. It didn't really work out. But since then, he was a fractional CTO consultant. So he was also kind of working at home. So we've always had some autonomy, like just not working on the same thing. But the lifestyle, like we never even had that conversation of like, oh, what's your goal for the lifestyle? It's like, well, how do we keep this up? Right. So I think it was more like that. But to I love that, like really kind of like list it out like in the way that I had just shared is something that like I've always done on my own.
That's so great. So now you would say that you're both very clear and aligned that the life that you guys have created together right now in this present moment, that is your goal, is to be able to continue to maintain that. Would you say that that's a shared goal you both have now?
I think that's the most like bottom line. Okay. Right? Like what like this is maintaining is like, you know, I don't want to like look a gift horse in the mouth. Of course, like this is amazing if we can maintain it, but there definitely is like a next level that we'd want to get to. Like, we don't have everything we want, right? However, our lives are not lacking anything. Yeah. Of course, you can always do better. We don't have like, maybe I don't want to check on Momondo to see like which day I can fly, which is the cheapest, or like, do I have to choose this Airbnb over this Airbnb? You know, like we're still doing that, right? So of course there's a level where like, okay, maybe we don't have to do that one day, or like maybe we don't have to work, or maybe there's actual people doing 95% of our job, right? So there's definitely another level that we want to get to, but the urgency and the desperation is no longer there, which by the way is kind of another problem because a few months ago, like just before the summer, I kind of like lost motivation for what I was doing. So I actually just took 3 months off this summer. I just like kind of maintained my emails, and I just kind of like let my emotions like stew for a bit. And only a couple of weeks ago, I realized that I was not motivated because the goal that I had set out had already been hit. So why am I here? Like, why don't I just sell this thing, or can I sell this thing and not work? So I've had to kind of find new fire and new motivation to ignite myself. But that was kind of an interesting, I guess, yeah, that was an interesting emotion that I had like never felt in my life.
Oh, that was the first time that you came to that crossroads. So like even when you reflect back to like that moment where you had the realization at SAP that like corporate life was not for you, that was a different thing than what you were experiencing in this moment.
Yeah, like for me to lack motivation is like a big deal. Like people like us don't lack motivation and discipline. Like I always say, like I am not the most experienced, smartest, like not the most hardest working, but nobody will out-consistent me. And I could not I couldn't pull my shit together. Like I couldn't get any LinkedIn posts out, any articles. Like I just didn't care. So I was like, well, why don't I just kind of let this ride for a few months? So then I just did that.
Was it the time passing and like the mental break, or was it this like you had this new aha of like, okay, here is why? Like, do you find a new purpose, or was like I just needed a break for a minute and now I'm kind of back to that?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know I needed a break. I remember like telling my friend, who's another founder as well, a little bit ahead of me. That's why you need to surround yourself with people that are like you, that are ideally a bit ahead of you. And he was like, you know, sometimes you just need to let yourself like just take a break for a while. And I'm like, but what if it's like 2 months? He's like, well, you have the rest of your life to work. Like 2 months is nothing. But when you come back, you need to come back and you don't squander this opportunity. And I'm like, okay, that's actually really good advice. So I took a break, but I didn't know when that was going to end. I wasn't like, okay, September 1st, this is over. But, I had this moment a couple weeks ago that was like a kind of like an epiphany moment for me, where I thought, how people always say like the dots connect backwards.
Okay.
But I believe that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And so I was trying to connect the dots forward. So I'm like, okay, well, why is it that I'm here? Like, why is it that I've got this business, I've got this life, I've got this really good opportunity. But on the other side of my life, which we haven't talked about, is like I'm a community builder and leader in my community. So I have a community with another co-founder of mine, and like we bring together like people like ourselves, like kind of global citizens who intentionally design their lives around enjoying life and great music and meaningful connections. So when we go to a festival, for example, there's like 100 of us, and I am in the middle of that. And that really blew up this year. Like in June, we organized a 200 person private festival in like an island in Croatia. And so like, that's my other life.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's my other life. So then I'm like, why, like, how do I put the two and two together? Why am I here in this position? And I thought, what if my work, my job is supposed to channel into my next thing, which is something into this community? Like, how awesome would it be if we sold this for some millions of dollars and we were the person building some new way of living or some new way of coexisting for the community that we build? Because people that are my age right now are asking like, well, what does the next 20 years look like?
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't want to live in tiny apartments alone. Like, how do we end up living together? Like, I really think that like our parents had friends and went home, but we truly live in communities and we want to live in communities. And that's why we want to stay connected all the time. Right? So I kind of had that light bulb moment, and I'm like, what if I'm not doing this just for us? Like, what if I'm doing this for all of our friends? So that's kind of where I found the motivation again. And I got to tell you, like, I have not been more focused. Like,
I love that.
Yeah, for like the last couple of weeks. So I'm like right back at it.
Wow. Well, I mean, clearly the purpose is so much bigger than you and your needs and your relationship with David. Like, it's just, you've made it this huge purpose of what it is that you're working towards. Obviously, that's so much more meaningful. I can definitely see where that would be motivating. That's crazy. And you're also giving me like the WeWork story, like vision of when they tried to have all of the people living together in these like communal homes. Yeah. And I'm like, that's what I'm visioning right away. It's like, oh, okay. It's like,
but less delusional than him.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know. Crazy people do innovative things. So who am I to say that something sounds outlandish? It's, clearly it didn't work though. So we'll see what you guys come up with. Okay. Listen, I want to flip it around a little bit. Obviously a lot of our listeners are females, and so many of them are trying to figure out what path they should be on, or where they should go, or how they should get there, or what this looks like for them. We also know that doesn't look the same for anybody. But I started this podcast with the intention of like helping inspire and empower women through hearing the stories and journeys of other women. So are there things that you're doing personally today, whether it's through your community efforts or at work or professionally, even outside of that, through your networks, that you feel like you're taking on to help empower other women?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I don't do is I don't like go and tell everybody I'm a female entrepreneur. Like that actually like is one thing that like I'm kind of allergic to. Like when people are like, oh, what's it like to be a female entrepreneur? I'm like, I don't know. You tell me, right? I thought I was just an entrepreneur before you asked me that question.
Right.
So that's like one thing I don't parade around, but people around me, or like whether it's like digitally on LinkedIn or in my social circles, like they know that I'm a founder and I'm an entrepreneur and I have my own business, and they see me living this lifestyle. And sometimes people ask like, hey, what do you do? How do you do this? And I think I'm just radically transparent with everything. So nothing is taboo. If you ask me like how much money I make, like how much I pay myself, how much I spend on something, how did I get there? I will tell you everything, because I think these questions and I think these conversations are really important because nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
So if you don't share how you got to where you got to, then how can someone else feel like it's possible for them? Like, I think people need to know that this dream is not out of reach, right? Like when people say, oh, you guys are living the dream life. I'm like, well, yeah, we designed it, but you got to start.
Yeah.
Right.
You guys were very intentional.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody can be, but they don't know that. but they also have to start somewhere, right? Like I said, it's not like black and white. It's not 0 to 100. Like, maybe you move up like a few percent at a time, but you got to start making those decisions, right? And you got to start making decisions. Like, you got to start saying no to things that take you farther away from that goal, that life goal. I think most people just don't even have a life goal. They're just living this kind of week to week, month to month. I'm happy. I'm not happy. Maybe I should just take a trip, right? But like, it just seems like a waste of time if you don't know, like, where's all this getting me eventually, right? Because we are exactly where we're supposed to be. So I think the short answer is, like, I just try to be an example. And if somebody asks me, if somebody approaches me, then I'm like very, very open to like dissecting my life and how they could potentially do it. And, most importantly, what it costs, because I think that's like the thing that people are like most curious about.
It's so interesting.
And the number is a lot smaller than you think
than people would think. I think everyone has these like everyone's got an inflated idea of what numbers in this situation, right, would look like. So I'm not going to ask you, but I could see where people, again, ideas and thoughts of what that looks like. Okay. So now you've been on this huge journey. You've done all of these things. Looking back, what's one piece of advice that you like wish you had day one? You start your career. What's the thing that you're like, damn, if I knew that then, it would have saved me years. It would have saved me hundreds of $1,000s, days, life, whatever.
Oh,
what's that
choices.
one piece?
So many choices. I mean, like, outside of like, put all of your money into Bitcoin and never start a company, which is like half serious. If it's like actual like building business advice, I would say you don't need to give half your company away just because this person is a co-founder. And I think especially for CEOs and first-time CEOs, or maybe inexperienced CEOs, and maybe women CEOs, actually, we don't value ourselves enough, right? Like, especially if we need a technical co-founder, and CTOs are really hard to find, especially great CTOs are really hard to find. The CEO builds the business, the CTO builds the product, period. I don't care what you say. You're not raising money. You're not hiring. You're not firing. You are not, you're not the person borrowing the money when the company, needs a bridge loan, right? Like, you're not doing the marketing. You're not coming out with the idea. Like, I think a lot of CEOs and business co-founders don't value themselves enough. Maybe like the second time you realize that, but like, if you split half your company with someone that isn't putting in the same amount of work and value, that hurts at the exit. I think that's one. But I think the second one is definitely don't be in a rush to hire people. They always surprise you. Try before you buy also applies to people.
I can appreciate that. And I wish that there was a way to do that always. Like, can we do a trial
there is a way.
before?
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you just do it, right? So
yeah.
That's so funny. Those are good. And listen, I think that your advice on the first part is transferable, right? Like, you don't have to be the CEO, right? And like, I think the important thing there is like we don't value ourselves enough. And I think that translates when you see people negotiating for salaries, taking risks, going out on a limb. Like, I think there's always this doubt. And I think it's kind of rooted in that.
I think it's more than that, right? It's not even just a doubt in yourself. It's almost like because you don't believe, it's almost like you believe the other person will create more value than you because you don't understand their job, right? Like, I don't know tech, and it's really hard to hire a tech person. And there's like, what I'm normalizing everything that I do because I think everything I do is easy because I'm a high performer and I'm kind of deluded in that way. And it took me so long to find you. So I'll just give you half the company so that you'll work with me. Right. But that is false. And I think that the advice I have now for like co-founder kind of relationships, especially in the beginning, especially when people are like negotiating equity splits, first is try before you buy. By the way, you do not have to split your house before you invite someone as your co-founder. Even with David, he was my advisor before he was like a consultant that I paid before he became my co-founder. Of course, always pay your consultants market rate so they don't feel like they owe you. And then you have to list out the responsibilities that you both are going to own. And then you have to look at that and say, okay, well, what percentage split is fair based on the split of these responsibilities. So I think that gives a very kind of scientific approach rather than like, well, I'm, a co-founder, so I deserve this. Well, why? How are you going to back that up?
I think it's an important conversation that to your point, right? Probably not enough people are having. Okay. Well, listen, I know that we're rounding out at the hour here, and I promise you, like I promise all my guests, we will never run a minute over because I will not be the reason someone's late to something. Although you don't have meetings, which is a whole nother thing that like I need to like redesign my life for that. I think that would be my life goal, is to just never have another meeting, or one I didn't want to go to at least. Okay. So before we wrap up today though, what's the one thing you would leave our listeners with? Like a piece of advice, something grand. You've got a lot figured out. I think probably more than some of us. What's your advice for us?
Yeah, I think that you can have everything you want, just not everything today. So you can have your cake and eat it too. That's how I live my life. And, to the women listening to this, it also applies to like your partner, your relationship with your partner, I think. I think that women a lot of times feel like they maybe have to take the back seat, like with their husbands, or maybe they should dim themselves a bit and, not be so outspoken, not be too ambitious or whatnot. But like, I think the best relationships are ones that make you more of who you are, right? It's like 1 + 1 = 3. Like a lot of people are surprised that like David works for me, but he's open to like owning that, right? Like he'll be like, yeah, I'm like, the CTO, I work for her. And you need a guy that really just loves you for everything that you are, especially if you are a CEO personality. Like you don't have to dim yourself. So when I say like you can have your cake and eat it too, I'm not just applying to like business and being able to design your life of freedom, right? Like don't think that you have to change yourself and make yourself smaller for a person because you feel like, society doesn't accept that, right? And that's just the way that like, because I've always been so outspoken about this, I'm unapologetically myself, I ended up finding someone who just loves that and is completely willing to take a backseat sometimes in certain parts of our lives. And part of me feeling like this is my proudest moment is not just me. And, it's not just because David is my co-founder and we built a business. It's also the relationship that we've been able to have that allows this company to happen, right? So I think like, yes, you can be a strong, independent person or woman, but if you can find a partner that like really fuels you and fuels that and like, can complete you and make you more of you, like that is an amazing life to have.
That was such a powerful reflection and I think an important message for us to end on. I actually felt like this moment of like pride because again, I know my husband is listening to this and he and I very much would say that is the relationship that we have as well. Although we can't work together, all of the other pieces are there. And, I think my success is because of his support, our love, our relationship. And so I love to hear that. And I think you're right. We can. So I think if you don't feel like you have it all today, know that you can. And like, let's go see what we can do to make that happen. I love that, Melissa. I think that is such a great way for us to wrap up our conversation today. I've really, really enjoyed our conversation. Honestly, your journey is not only inspiring, it's extremely motivating because it's getting me to rethink, like, I'm like, what the hell am I doing at all these damn meetings all day? But really excited to see what the future holds. I'm excited to see what you end up doing for your community. So I just want to thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Oh, great. All right. Well, listen, everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, connect with me on LinkedIn. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Hi guys, I want to share a bit about an organization that I support called Wednesday Women. They're on a mission to increase the visibility of executive women leaders that you should know, learn from, and be inspired by. On LinkedIn, they share the profile of 2 amazing women each week, on Wednesdays of course.
And now just imagine if we all followed, amplified, and nominated the women that we want to see more of. Their initiative provides examples of women CEOs, founders, sales executives, technical leaders, and so many more. By supporting Wednesday Women, you'll see more of these professionals in your social feeds, of course, but also on stages, podcasts, and panels. If you're interested in learning more and supporting their initiative, head over to www.wednesdaywomen.org or follow them on LinkedIn.